Welcome back. We have another very interesting company up next. So I'm very happy to introduce Integrum, who will be our next company presenting. And we will have Rickard Brånemark, the founder and chairman of the company, with us presenting today. So without further ado, Rickard, the floor is yours. Welcome and looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to present some of our work here. And I bring you greetings from a lab room in Tübingen, where I'm sitting right now after I performed a couple of surgeries this morning. So can I have the next slide, please? So my name is Rickard Brånemark, and as you heard, I'm the founder and the chairman of the company, and actually run the company for the first 17 years until I moved to the US. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training, and we established a center at University of California, San Francisco. I worked there as a couple of years as a professor of orthopedic surgery, but these days I work part-time as a researcher at MIT. Our core product is what we call the Oprah implant system that consists of two main components, an inner implant and an outer component called Oprah Aktier, that is working like a ski binding, a safety device that is connecting the inner implant to an external prosthesis. So next slide, please. So we're in the field of amputations, major limb amputations that is dramatically changing the life course of the individual that is suffering from this. It's not only related to body and physical integrity, it's also related to mental well-being and social well-being and interaction in the society when you got a disability. And not least in the US, key market for us, there is a lot of financial issues to consider with increased healthcare cost and work opportunities. Maybe you lose your job. In the US, there are about 185,000 amputations performed each year, and there are about 2 million individuals living with limb amputations, and they forecast that it will be roughly 4 million 2050. Next slide, please. So what is it really that Integrum is doing? Well, we are addressing a new way to treat amputees that never really been done before. And we use that with our special Oprah implant system. We are the only company that has any kind of approval to use this device in the US market. We are already working with some of the leading university hospitals in the world, and we are, for instance, working together with the Department of Defense. Last year, during the pandemic, we were still able to show a strong growth, and we are actually now improving profitability from being run at a loss to almost break even. And we have some very interesting high-tech solutions in the pipeline. And we have a well-established management team and board of directors. Next slide, please. So in 2017, we went public and we are listed on NASDAQ First North. The collaboration with the Department of Defense includes a commitment from their side to invest $6 million in using our technology to treat wounded warriors. We're working with University of California, San Francisco, Johns Hopkins, University of Southern California, Duke, etc. We have performed more than 500 surgeries, and since we got the PMA approval from FDA in December 2020, at least FDA is considering those surgeries to be successful. Next slide, please. So what are we addressing? The old technology is called a socket prosthesis, and that's been around for a long period of time. And I think the major shift came in the 1600s. I know that Össur is on the presentation list. Maybe they have another opinion, but let me tell you why there is a conceptual problem with the socket. Next slide, please. So the problem with a socket is similar to dentures. And maybe you know that osseointegration is something that was developed in Gothenburg in the early 1960s by my father, Per-Ingvar Brånemark, and led to the implementation of modern dental implantology. That now is a big game changer in the treatment of edentulism. Next slide, please. So we have extended that technology to orthopedic osseointegration to be able to provide amputees with increased comfort and performance. Next slide, please. So here is the socket. That is this white hard shell that is surrounding the amputee's stump. And what is the problem here? The problem is we have the skeleton because the skeleton is very good at transferring loads, much better than soft tissues. Next slide, please. But with an amputation and the socket solution, you need to use the soft tissues, the muscles, the subcutaneous fat, and the skin to transfer the loads. And this is not a good system. So the concept is wrong. You should transfer the loads via the skeleton. So how can you do that? Next slide, please. And that is what we are doing with the Oprah implant system. So here you see a stump top left, and there is some kind of pin coming out, and that's a part of the Oprah implant system that has two major inner components, one that sits inside the bone and then another piece that comes out through the skin. And to the end of the piece that comes out through the skin, there is this safety device. And with this load transfer, we increase the range of motion. We have a very stable attachment, absolutely stable. It's easy to take on and take off. It improves mobility. You don't have to adjust the shape of the stump when you gain weight or lose weight. With the GS, you deteriorate and have muscle atrophy. And of course, all the pressure source and pain that is coming from the socket that is frequently working like a bad pair of shoes, that goes away completely. Next slide, please. To this, we have been working many years with an implanted control system that we call the Oprah system, the mind control prosthesis, or the robot arm system. And that is an upgrade we can do to patients already been treated with the Oprah implant system. So we can use the implant as a bidirectional information portal. And by doing that, we can help the brain to think that the prosthesis is becoming a part of the brain and actually of the person's body. Next slide, please. So I think you have a video here that you need to...
Jag heter Rickard Brånemark, är 45 år, bor på en gård i Lövånger i Västerbotten med fru och 3 barn. 2011 var jag med om en högspänningsolycka i ett ställverk och blev kraftigt brännskadad, förlorade min vänstra arm. Och efter det så fick jag då börja använda en hylsprotes som jag egentligen aldrig kände mig bekväm i. Den satt dåligt och var svår att kontrollera, svår att få sätta som man ville på morgonen. Efter ett tag så kände jag det att min högra hand började domna av och jag fick problem med rörelseförmågan i vänster axel och ryggen började kännas sned. Jag tänkte att det här måste finnas någonting bättre. Och då kom jag i kontakt med Integrum och blev erbjuden att prova Oprah-systemet, vilket jag då valde att göra. Och efter 2 operationer och en del rehabilitering så kunde jag då börja använda den protes jag har idag. Och det har ju öppnat upp en helt ny värld. Det går inte att jämföra, det är så otroligt mycket bättre. Systemet är lätt att använda. Jag tar på mig pucken, klickar fast den och startar den på några sekunder är den igång. Med hylsprotesen kunde man få ta på den flera gånger innan det väl börjar fungera. Det kan ta upp till 20 minuter, en halvtimme innan man kan börja använda den på morgonen, så att det kändes aldrig bekvämt. Det som var kvar det var ju att ytelektroderna var väldigt störkänsliga för mig. Jag kunde aldrig riktigt lita på greppet när man var i en miljö med mycket elektronik. Helt plötsligt kunde handen bara öppna om man tappade saker. Då blev jag erbjuden att delta i ett forskningsprojekt som en av hittills 4 personer. Och det heter då Oprah och då har de opererat in elektroderna i armen. Vilket har gjort att störningarna för mig är helt borta. Och precisionen är mycket, mycket mer finkänslig. Jag kan göra väldigt små rörelser och styra ännu bättre ovanför huvudet. Och det är en helt ny värld även det. Och det möjliggör även att jag får en viss känselrespons tillbaka. När jag tar i saker så känner jag att greppet finns där. I och med att vi då lever på en gård och jag hade tidigare ett väldigt aktivt liv, finns sysslor att göra hela tiden, har ett stort motorsportintresse, så var jag väldigt begränsad med min hylsprotes. Man litade inte på greppet och det var svårt att röra sig. Idag så har ju allt det där börjat komma tillbaka mer och mer. Jag hittar nya saker varje dag som jag kan göra. Och jag känner det som tidigare, då bar man en protes som ett hjälpmedel. Idag är protesen mer en del av mig. Jag ser det inte som att jag bär protes. Det är en helt ny värld.
Next slide, please. So far I've mostly been talking about the technology, but of course we also need to run a business. And here is our management team with Maria Lopez, that is the CEO, and she started working in the company in 2011, working through R&D and operations out to the executive position. Dennis Beckland is a fairly recently recruited CFO, about 18 months ago, coming from Latour. Blake Pokres is running the business in the US, and he has more than 12 years working with respected companies like Stryker and Arthrex. James Sheridan's even more experience working outside the US and has more than 20 years of experience working with osseointegration in the dental implant field, establishing businesses in Australia and Japan. And Niklas Hoverberg, that's head of quality and regulatory, has been working for AstraZeneca, Cochlear, and also in the dental implant field. Next slide, please. So today, our absolutely core business is around the Oprah implant system that is creating almost all of our revenue. And in the clinical trial phase, and also, of course, teasing Department of Defense is these mind-controlled prostheses. And in addition to that, we have another treatment for phantom pain, that is a severe pain that you can get after amputation. It's a system, it's an augmented reality system that we created, and that's just been CE marked, and we're still in the early phase of launching that commercially. Next slide, please. I think our biggest milestone so far, and maybe ever, is the fairly recent PMA we got from the FDA for the Oprah implant system for treatment of above-knee amputees. And this, as I said previously, this is first and the only product in the world to receive a market approval in the US. And this is something that, of course, opening up the entire US market, but also changes the perception when you come with a new technology that will be considered as experimental, clinical trial, etc. We are now past that stage, and we are confident that this technology will be a new standard of care for selected amputees. And in addition to that, the PMA will also help us to drive recruitment of new patients and facilitate the fairly challenging reimbursement negotiations that you have in the US healthcare system. Next slide, please. So if we look into the US and some selected European countries, we expect the market value to be about 7 or 8 billion US dollars. And that is based on that there are about 3 million people living with amputation in these markets, and about 1.3 million people have amputation caused by trauma or cancer, where we have the indications for the Oprah implant system. And out of those, about 20% are directly indicated to be using the Oprah implant system, and with an average sales price of $30,000, that leads to this market size. Next slide, please. So how can we attack this market, this big market? Well, these are some of the core activities we identified. We need to find the really key opinion leaders. And I think in the US, we have already a good track record with Johns Hopkins, UCSF, Walter Reed, that is the big military hospital just outside of Washington, D.C., University of Southern California, etc. But we also need to expand the number of centers or hospitals that are working with the system. We have ourselves a fairly small sales and marketing organization in the US, and that will not be quick enough. So we joined forces with Oncos Surgical, a smaller US-based orthopedic implant company that is targeting university hospitals and the leading university hospitals in the US. And they're about 5 times bigger than us, and they have a good, strong reputation and experience coming from the Stryker sphere with more than 20 years of experience there. But we also need to work with creating awareness for surgeons, rehabilitation specialists, and potential patients. And one important tool here is, of course, like social media. And we have been very fortunate to be able to run a couple of patient stories, free ads, and that is, for instance, on CBS Sunday Morning Show. That is one of the most respected morning shows in the US. And all of this will also aim to our long-term vision that this will be able to create these treatments as a standard of care. Next slide, please. So since the US is the most important, we put down this slide, and here you see the leading hospitals that we're working with already today. Oncos Surgical, that is bringing 20 years of experience in selling advanced orthopedic implant system to our organization. And we are also working with this ski binding or safety device, the Oprah Aktier that I talked about in the beginning, and that is distributed in the US by Oprah, and Oprah is the biggest orthopedic prosthetic company in the world. Next slide, please. So inside this pandemic, we have now, we have a broken year, so we reported 3 quarters. We have gone from, on an annual basis, a loss of about 15 million to now have a small operating profit. We're growing about 50%, and we have good traction. Next slide, please. And of course, what we see is in the US, our target market, we have an even stronger growth with about 90% for the first 3 quarters. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Rickard. So first one here, to what extent would you say that treatment guidelines are established in the field of prosthetics, and is this a requirement to get broad reimbursement and standardized reimbursement in the US?
Okay, yeah, so the entire reimbursement thing, that it's complicated in the US, but I try to be very brief. So in principle, you can say that 2 systems. It's when you're retired, and then you have Medicare. And Medicare is typically more conservative and might require more work. Our targeted patient population is 22 to 65, so we don't really target them right now. However, we have a pathway, and we think it would take us 3, maybe up to 5 years to get the streamlined reimbursement for Medicare patients. All other patients, that is our primary target right now, they have private health insurance, Blue Cross, United Health, Sutter Health, etc. And therefore, any kind of procedure you do, if it's new or old, you still require pre-authorization. So, of course, with the new technology, it's more challenging, but with the PMA and very, respected university hospitals, so far we have seen that it's on a case by case going forward. It's been fairly successful, and you can see the growth. For a really big growth in the US, we need to have established what you're referring to, codes and established reimbursement levels. But I think we can continue to grow at least a couple of years, maybe even more, until that will maybe become an issue if we can't resolve that problem. But I'm confident that we will.
Great. Sounds very interesting. And can you talk a bit more about the data underlying the PMA application? How many patients it was based on? Maybe some key factors. The prevalence of deep infections, revision rates, use of walking aids, etc. And perhaps if this data is very important as you sell the product, or is it more a commercial play where you try to attract with margins, etc.?
Yeah, so of course there's a lot of things to talk about there, and it's also public figures because this is something that the FDA is publishing on their webpage. So we had in total 65 patients included in the study protocols, and they were treated in Sweden, which is a bit rare. Normally you need to have US-based studies. And we had an overall success rate of a bit just above 90% at 5 years follow-up. And that means that the 10% were failure. And I think of those 10%, it was 25% that lost the implant. So it's actually one patient out of the 4 failures we had. But that was based on the implant system we used in the late 1990s, and that's not the implant system we have presently on the US market, even though there is what we call substantial equivalence. And there we have short-term results now being a couple of years, and we actually have almost 100% success rate, so that's improving. But I think from a communication strategy, it might be the studies, but mostly it's the PMA. I think if FDA is approving a device, then it's supposed to be a good device.
Sure, absolutely. And can you also perhaps give some flavor on the complexity of the intervention here? Is it a significant learning curve for orthopedic surgeons to adopt this technology as opposed to what they're currently doing, so to speak?
Well, what should I say? I've done this so many times, so I think it's fairly easy. And I think we also, we have, I think the figures, we have 30 centers that we train around the world. So it's not that difficult, but it's not something that the junior surgeons should start with directly. It should be experienced surgeons. And then we didn't talk about that. We have 2 surgeries. One surgery when you put in the inner implant, that's very straightforward orthopedic surgery, and anyone can be trained in doing that very rapidly. And then the second stage surgery, when you do a more plastic surgery reconstructions, that is more challenging for an orthopedic surgeon. But we see that most centers, they actually have a collaboration, so they have an orthopedic surgeon and a plastic surgeon working together, and that will lessen the burden on our training a lot.
Sure, absolutely. And switching gears a bit to the financial side, are there any financial, sort of medium-term financial targets we should look out for, think around? You communicated roughly 50% growth rates historically. How should we think going forward? And on that, will you communicate sort of financial targets in the near term that you can talk about?
Well, so the PMA is triggering a lot of things and a lot of activities, and I think that's one of the last boxes we wanted to check, because we already checked that we can sell in the US, we can sell to Department of Defense, we can sell to public hospitals. We're happy with the prices we get, and we're happy with the sort of the reimbursement frequency we get. How many percentage? We don't really have the figures but we're well above the 50% that we initially thought before we got the PMA, and still the PMA is not fully implemented in the market. That might take another year or so. So that means that we are fairly confident that the commercial side is working, and we are very confident that the product is working because we have been using that for 30 years. So that means that now it's time to scale up the business and be more aggressive. So we're working internally with the goals, and I hope I will be able to share more with you in the future, but I don't have any prognosis to disclose today. But of course, if we are able to grow roughly 50% in the middle of the pandemic, I guess you can think that would not be our real target. We would like to go higher.
Great. And just a final quick one. The last 2 quarters has been very strong, particularly in the US. 119 and 94% growth year over year, respectively. Can you say anything about the trends here in the next fiscal quarter that you will be reporting in June? Are you happy with the market development in the quarter?
Well, I cannot comment those figures, but we are working hard. And everyone knows that the healthcare systems are under less pressure. And we got the PMA, which means that we can now quicker recruit new centers, maybe going from up to more than a year to maybe half a year. So even though we will maybe not see the full effect this quarter, I think we created a nice foundation for a strong future growth.
Fantastic. And that's, in the interest of time, Rickard, we will end the presentation here. I want to thank you again very much for participating today. Wish you a good day ahead, and best of luck going forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.